When I first moved into the house, I thought the neighbors were just being dramatic. People in small towns often like to cling to old stories, and the one they told me was simple: never go into the basement after midnight. I laughed it off, thinking it was their way of spooking the new guy on the block. But the way they said it, quietly, almost nervously, stuck with me more than I wanted to admit. The basement itself wasn't unusual at first glance. It had unfinished walls, an old washer and dryer, and shelves full of paint cans from the previous owners. Still, there was something about it that felt heavier than the rest of the house. Even in the middle of the day, the air down there was cooler, like the temperature dropped the second you hit the last step. I tried to tell myself it was just poor insulation. One of my neighbors, an older man named Frank, leaned over my fence one afternoon and gave me the warning again. He told me not to ignore it, that people who lived in the house before me had strange experiences, and a few had even moved away without notice. His voice was serious, almost pleading, but I brushed it off with a smile. After all, what could possibly be waiting in a basement after midnight? The first few weeks went by quietly, and I actually started using the basement for storage. Boxes lined the shelves, and I'd sometimes throw laundry in late at night when I couldn't sleep. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but I couldn't help noticing how the house seemed to creak differently past midnight. It wasn't the usual settling of wood. It was sharper, more deliberate, almost like footsteps pacing. I tried to rationalize it by blaming the pipes or the shifting of the foundation. But one night, as I stood in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water, I heard the sound of something moving below me. It wasn't pipes, it wasn't wood, it was distinct, the dragging of something heavy across the basement floor. I froze, gripping the counter, listening harder. When it stopped, the silence felt suffocating. The following day, I casually mentioned it to Frank when he was out watering his lawn. He didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, his face went pale, and he told me that once the noises start, it's only a matter of time before I'd see something too. He told me again, never go down there after midnight. His words replayed in my head all day, but a stubborn part of me still thought it was ridiculous. By the third week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The noises had become nightly, always starting just past midnight, scraping, dragging, sometimes even what sounded like faint whispers under the floorboards. I started losing sleep, lying awake listening for the next sound, heart pounding whenever it came. Finally, curiosity began to outweigh fear, and I made up my mind. If there really was something in my basement, I had to see it for myself. That night, I sat in the living room with the clock glowing on the wall. 12:03 a.m. ticked past, and like clockwork, the dragging noise began again. It was louder this time, more insistent, echoing through the floor as if whatever caused it wanted me to hear. My chest tightened, but I grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the basement door. With each step, the sound grew clearer, vibrating faintly through the doorknob as I reached for it. The moment I opened the door, a wave of cold air spilled out, colder than anything I had felt before. I hesitated, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand, before forcing myself to step down onto the creaking wooden stairs. The dragging sound stopped instantly, as though it had been waiting for me. My ears rang with silence, and the weight of the air pressed down on me as I descended. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to thicken, like I was walking underwater. My flashlight beam wavered across the concrete floor, revealing nothing but dust and old stains. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there with me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, but pride and curiosity kept my feet moving. I reached the bottom step and paused, listening. The silence was deafening, and for a moment I wondered if I had imagined everything. Then from the far corner of the basement came a soft scrape, like fingernails dragging across cement. My light shot toward the sound, but the beam revealed only a stack of boxes and an old shelf leaning against the wall. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself to go check, to prove to myself there was nothing there. Each step felt heavier, like the floor was resisting me. When I reached the corner, I crouched down and moved the boxes aside with one hand. Behind them was nothing but cracked concrete. Still, the sound had been so clear, so close, that I couldn't convince myself it was just my imagination. As I stood there, a sudden thud echoed from above, as if someone had slammed a door upstairs. My chest tightened, realizing I had left the main floor completely empty. I turned back toward the staircase, shining my light upward, half expecting to see someone standing at the top. But the doorway was empty, just a rectangle of darkness leading back to the house. I started climbing back up the steps, the boards groaning beneath me. Halfway up, I froze again. The dragging sound had returned, louder now. moving across the floor beneath me. This time, it wasn't coming from one corner. It circled the basement, echoing off the walls like something massive was shifting in the shadows. My throat went dry as I gripped the railing tighter. For a split second, I considered bolting up the stairs, slamming the door, and pretending none of this had happened. But something inside me, maybe foolishness, maybe adrenaline, made me stop. I turned back, shining the flashlight down toward the basement floor. That's when I noticed it. Faint marks across the cement, long grooves, like something had been dragged across the same path over and over again. The grooves led to the far wall, stopping at what looked like an uneven seam in the concrete. My heart pounded harder as I crouched down, running my hand across it. It felt different from the rest of the wall, hollow somehow. Before I could pull away, the dragging sound stopped abruptly, replaced by something worse, whispering. Low, breathy voices, so faint I couldn't tell how many there were, but close enough to feel them against my skin. The whispers grew louder as I leaned closer to the wall. My light flickered once, and in that flicker, I swore I saw movement in the seam, like something shifting just beyond the concrete. My legs locked in place, torn between the urge to run and the sick fascination pulling me forward. It didn't feel like my basement anymore. It felt like a passage, a barrier to something that wasn't meant to be found. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The silence was so complete it almost hurt my ears. And then slowly, the seam in the wall seemed to quiver, as though something on the other side had pressed against it. My flashlight caught a faint outline, the suggestion of a hand pushing outward. I stumbled back, my heel catching the edge of the stairs, the cold concrete floor rattling under my fall. I scrambled back to my feet, my flashlight shaking in my grip as I aimed it toward the wall again. The outline of the hand was gone, but the seam still seemed to pulse faintly, as though something alive pressed just beyond it. My breathing grew shallow, every sound amplified in the dense stillness. I knew I should run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. The dragging sound began again, but this time it wasn't distant. It came from right beneath me, like something crawling just below the concrete floor. My chest tightened as the vibrations rippled upward, rattling through the shelves and boxes. I backed toward the stairs, desperate not to look away, afraid of what might happen if I did. Each second stretched painfully long. Then, the flashlight dimmed. I smacked it against my palm, panic flaring in my chest as the beam sputtered in and out. In those brief moments of darkness, I thought I saw shapes shifting near the wall, long, distorted, like shadows bending at impossible angles. The whispers returned too, sharper this time, overlapping voices that seemed to crawl directly into my head. I couldn't take it anymore. My body jolted into motion, sprinting up the stairs 2 at a time. Behind me, I heard the dragging rise into a screeching scrape, as if something massive had thrown itself against the wall. The house seemed to shake faintly, dust falling from the ceiling as I slammed the basement door shut behind me. My hands trembled violently against the lock. I stood there for several minutes, pressed against the door, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing came, just silence, like the house had swallowed the noise whole. I tried to convince myself it was stress, exhaustion, or even the neighbors' stories worming their way into my imagination. But the marks on the basement floor burned in my mind, impossible to ignore. For the next few nights, I avoided the basement altogether. I slept with the lights on, ears tuned for the dragging that had become part of my nights. Strangely, the noises stopped once I stopped going down there, almost as if whatever was beneath that wall knew I had finally listened. But the silence wasn't comforting, it was worse. It felt like waiting. One evening, Frank caught me outside again. He asked if I had finally listened to his warning, and I admitted what I'd seen. His face turned grim, and he told me every family before me had gone through the same thing. "The more you acknowledge it," he said quietly, "the stronger it becomes." His words left a hollow feeling in my chest. It's been months now, and I still haven't stepped foot back down there after midnight. But the strange thing is, I don't have to. Some nights I wake up to faint whispers leaking through the vents, just enough to remind me what waits below. Sometimes I swear I hear the dragging too, distant but patient, as if it knows I'm listening. I don't tell people about it anymore. Even if I did, they wouldn't believe me, and I can't risk feeding it more than I already have. But if you ever move into a house where the neighbors warn you about the basement after midnight, take it seriously. Trust me, I didn't, and I still regret it. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. When I first told my family about the house I bought, Everyone seemed excited except my grandma. She grew unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on the pictures I showed her. After a long silence, she shook her head and whispered that she couldn't step foot in it. When I asked why, she said she had seen it before, in her nightmares. At first, I laughed it off as an old person's superstition, but the way she looked at me stopped me cold. Her face drained of color, and she clutched my wrist with surprising strength. She told me there were rooms in that house I should never enter at night. I asked her which rooms she meant, but she wouldn't answer. Instead, she only muttered that the place was wrong. I moved in anyway, brushing her reaction aside as stress or coincidence. The house itself was old but charming, sitting on the edge of a quiet suburban street. The neighborhood was peaceful, lined with maple trees that cast long shadows across the road. From the outside, it looked like the perfect starter home, nothing like the nightmare she described. During the first week, everything seemed fine. I unpacked, set up furniture, and started to make the place feel like home. But every night, just after midnight, I would wake up suddenly with the sensation that someone was standing in my room. The air would feel thick, heavy enough to keep me frozen in bed. My clock would always read 12:47 a.m. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me in a new environment. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it grew worse as the days passed. Sometimes I would hear faint creaks in the hallway outside my room, as though weight pressed down on the floorboards. Other times, the doorknob would rattle ever so slightly. I tried to ignore it until one night I saw something. Half asleep, I rolled over and noticed the faint outline of a figure standing near the door. My eyes adjusted slowly, but by the time I blinked, it was gone. The room was empty, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Still, the impression of being watched lingered long after. I didn't tell my grandma about what was happening, mostly because I didn't want to admit she might be right. Instead, I brushed it aside, convincing myself it was stress or poor sleep. But her words kept echoing in my head, especially when I passed the basement door. For some reason, I found myself avoiding that side of the house after dark. The more I ignored the strange occurrences, the stronger they seemed to get. My dreams turned restless, always involving the house itself. I'd see long hallways that didn't exist, doors that led to nowhere, and sometimes a faceless figure standing by the staircase. I always woke drenched in fear, though I could never remember the exact details. By the end of that first week, I couldn't deny it anymore. Something about the house was wrong, and the most disturbing part was how familiar it had started to feel, like I had lived it before. That's when I finally understood the look on my grandma's face. Somehow, she had known. The second week in the house was when things escalated. Small details began to feel off, like doors being slightly ajar when I knew I had shut them. The kitchen clock would stop at 12:47 every night, no matter how many times I replaced the batteries. Even the neighbors seemed uneasy, offering polite hellos but quickly turning away when I mentioned where I lived. One evening, I decided to call my grandma again. I wanted answers, or at least reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. When I described the strange things I'd noticed, she grew silent on the other end. Finally, she told me that in her nightmares, she always saw someone standing at the top of the stairs, waiting for her. Her voice trembled when she begged me not to go near them at night. Her warning rattled me, but curiosity won out. That night, I stayed awake intentionally, sitting in the living room where I could see the staircase. Midnight passed quietly, and for a while I thought nothing would happen. Then, at 12:47, the air grew still and icy. The creaking of a single step echoed down the hall, even though no one was there. My stomach dropped, and I tried to convince myself it was just the wood expanding in the cool air. But the sound came again, this time 2 steps higher. The pressure in the room grew unbearable, like the air itself was pressing against my chest. I stared at the stairs until my eyes watered, praying the noise would stop. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The rest of the night was quiet, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every gust of wind against the house made me flinch. I sat there until the sun came up, exhausted and unsure if what I'd heard had been real. By morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it, though deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something had been there. The following night, I made the mistake of venturing upstairs. I wanted to prove to myself that nothing was wrong, that it was all in my head. But when I reached the landing, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A door at the end of the hall, slightly crooked in its frame. It looked older than the others, with a tarnished brass knob and wood that seemed warped with age. I didn't remember ever seeing that door when I first moved in. My heart raced as I approached it, every step slower than the last. The closer I got, the colder the air became until I could see my breath in the dim light. I reached out, hand trembling, and touched the knob. It was freezing, like metal left outside in the dead of winter. Before I could turn it, a sharp knock echoed from the other side, loud and sudden enough to make me stumble back. My ears rang with the sound, and I froze in place, too terrified to breathe. The hallway seemed to stretch longer than it should have, the shadows pulling tighter around me. Then, just as abruptly, the knock stopped, leaving only silence. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the door. The moment I turned and fled back downstairs, the air warmed again. But the memory of that sound, the hollow, urgent knock, stayed with me. My grandma's warning replayed in my head louder than ever. There were rooms in the house I should never enter at night. The night after the knocking, I avoided going upstairs altogether. I tried to distract myself with the TV, phone calls, anything to drown out the growing anxiety. But every sound seemed louder than usual. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, even my own footsteps across the hardwood floor. It felt like the house was alive, waiting for me to acknowledge it. Around midnight, I heard movement again, but this time, it wasn't the stairs. It came from above me, slow dragging noises across the upstairs floorboards. The sound repeated at uneven intervals, as if someone was pacing back and forth. My pulse quickened, and I realized the noise was directly above the living room, right where that crooked door had been. I grabbed my phone, debating whether to call my grandma again, but I already knew what she would say. Her nightmares weren't random, they were warnings. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, straining to hear every detail. The dragging grew heavier, like something large was being pulled across the floor until it stopped directly above my head. I forced myself upstairs, clutching a flashlight, even though every part of me screamed not to go. The hallway was colder than the rest of the house, just like before. My breath came out in sharp clouds as I stepped closer to the crooked door. This time, it wasn't just slightly open. It was cracked wider, just enough for the darkness inside to spill out. With shaking hands, I lifted the flashlight and aimed it through the gap. The beam illuminated a narrow room that looked nothing like the rest of the house. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor stained with something dark, and an old wooden chair sat facing the corner. The chair creaked slightly, though no one was sitting in it. Before I could pull away, the door swung open wider, as if inviting me inside. The flashlight flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. A faint whisper brushed against my ear, so close I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt locked in place. Summoning what courage I had, I stepped into the room. The floor groaned beneath my weight, and the door creaked shut behind me with a slow, deliberate click. Panic surged, and I twisted the knob, but it wouldn't budge. That was when I heard it. The faint sound of someone breathing in the corner where the chair was turned. The flashlight steadied long enough to reveal movement. The chair rocked slightly, scraping against the floor, though no one sat in it. Then, as if an invisible figure had risen, footsteps crossed the room toward me. I stumbled back, slamming against the wall, unable to comprehend what was happening. The air pressed heavy against my chest and my vision blurred. With every ounce of strength, I yanked the door open and bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my rush. I didn't stop until I was outside, barefoot on the cold grass, the house looming silently behind me. From the upstairs window, I could swear I saw the faint outline of someone standing there, watching me with impossible stillness. I never spent another night inside that house. I packed during the day when the sunlight made it feel safer, though I refused to go near that upstairs door again. My grandma was right. The house wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. To this day, I still wonder if moving in was ever my choice, or if the house had been waiting for me. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of knocking. It doesn't come from my new home, but from somewhere far away, as if reminding me that the house hasn't forgotten me. That thought alone is enough to keep me awake until morning. When my family first moved into our new house, it felt like a dream. It was bigger than anywhere we'd lived before, with wide hallways and rooms that echoed when we spoke. My parents were thrilled, calling it a fresh start and a place we could finally settle down. But from the very first night, something about the upstairs bedrooms unsettled me. The walls seemed too thin, carrying strange creaks and muffled sounds late at night. I told myself it was just the house settling, the kind of noise that comes with old wooden floors. Still, every time I tried to sleep, I felt like someone was quietly pacing in the hallway. I never admitted it to my parents because I didn't want to sound paranoid. A week later, I invited my best friend Kelly over for a sleepover. We set up in my room, dragging blankets onto the floor and whispering into the early hours. Kelly joked that the place felt haunted, though she laughed it off like it was nothing serious. I laughed too, but deep down, her words only confirmed the strange unease I already felt. Around midnight, the house grew so quiet that even our whispers seemed too loud. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint glow from the streetlight outside my window. For a while, we just lay there, staring at the ceiling and trying to drift off. Then Kelly nudged me sharply, her voice hushed but urgent. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, pointing toward the bed. At first, I thought she was messing with me, just trying to scare me in the middle of the night. But then I noticed it too. A faint shuffling sound, low to the ground, as if someone was dragging themselves across the floorboards. The sound was coming directly from under the bed. My stomach twisted, and I froze in place, afraid to even look. Kelly's eyes were wide, her hand gripping my arm so tightly it hurt. The shuffling grew slower, more deliberate, like whatever was under there was aware of us listening. I tried to tell myself it was just a mouse, or maybe the house creaking again, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Neither of us dared to move, and the silence stretched out until it felt unbearable. Just as I worked up the courage to lean over the edge of the bed, the sound stopped completely. The sudden quiet made my ears ring, as if the entire house was holding its breath. Kelly shook her head, whispering that I shouldn't look. But curiosity gnawed at me, stronger than my fear. I slowly leaned over the edge, my face hovering just above the dark gap beneath the bed. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out every other noise. For a moment, I saw nothing but shadows. Then something shifted in the dark, almost too quickly to catch. I shot upright, nearly toppling over onto the floor. Kelly covered her mouth, stifling a scream, her eyes darting between me and the space under the bed. We both sat frozen, our bodies stiff with fear, waiting for something else to happen. But the silence returned, heavy and suffocating, like the house itself was swallowing our fear whole. Neither Kelly nor I slept much after that. We huddled together under the blankets, whispering nervously about what we might have seen. Every time I thought about leaning over again, my chest tightened with fear. The space beneath the bed felt alive, like it was waiting for me to make the wrong move. By morning, everything seemed normal. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting the walls in a soft, warm glow. My parents laughed downstairs as if nothing had happened, and Kelly and I exchanged uneasy glances. She asked if I was going to tell them, but I shook my head. I didn't want to sound crazy. Kelly didn't want to sleep over again, and I couldn't blame her. The next few nights, I tried convincing myself it had been my imagination. But even when the house was silent, I felt a weight pressing down from under the bed, as though something was still hiding there. It was a fear that clung to me night after night. A week later, my parents had friends over, so I was left upstairs alone. I tried distracting myself with my phone, but the faintest noise made me flinch. That's when I heard it again. The low shuffle of something dragging against the floor. My body froze as the sound came directly from beneath me. I slid quietly off the bed and back toward the wall, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The sound continued, steady and unhurried, like someone moving just out of sight. My room suddenly felt too small, every corner filled with shadows. I wanted to scream for my parents but couldn't find the courage. Then the sound stopped, and for a moment the silence was worse. My eyes darted toward the gap under the bed, but I couldn't see anything in the dim light. I forced myself to take a step closer, though every nerve in my body screamed to run. Something about that space felt impossibly dark, like it could swallow me whole. I finally worked up the nerve to grab a flashlight from my desk. My hand shook as I turned it on and slowly crouched down, pointing the beam into the gap. At first, I only saw dust, stray socks, and boxes shoved against the wall. But as the light moved, I caught a glimpse of something pale pressed against the floorboards. It looked like fingers, long, thin, unmoving. I yanked the flashlight back, gasping loudly enough to echo through the house. My heart pounded as I waited for the shape to move, to vanish, to confirm it was just my imagination. But it didn't. Those fingers stayed there, curled slightly, almost like they were waiting. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall, the flashlight flickering in my grip. My breathing grew loud, ragged, and I could hardly hear anything else over it. Still, The house seemed to hum with an awful silence, one that made me feel completely trapped. I couldn't decide if I should run or stay frozen in place. I bolted downstairs, almost tripping over the steps as I shouted for my parents. They looked startled, but when I tried explaining, the words tumbled out too fast. My dad grabbed a flashlight and marched back upstairs, determined to prove I was just scaring myself. I wanted to believe him, but my legs shook as I followed. He crouched beside the bed while I stood frozen by the doorway. He swept the flashlight under, muttering about dust and clutter. Then he pulled out a cardboard box and shoved it aside, shaking his head. "See? Nothing's there," he said firmly, though his voice carried a strange hesitation. I wanted to argue, but the look on his face stopped me. His expression wasn't calm or reassuring. It was unsettled, as though he had seen something he couldn't quite explain. He quickly ordered me to sleep in the guest room that night, and I didn't protest. Anything was better than going back in there. The guest room was quiet, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. I kept picturing those pale fingers, unmoving yet too real to dismiss. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke to faint scratching. My heart dropped instantly. The sound wasn't coming from the walls or floor. It was from beneath the bed again. I knew it couldn't be possible. This wasn't my room, not my bed. Yet the sound was there, slow and steady, like someone tracing patterns against the wooden floor. I froze beneath the covers, every breath shallow. It was as if whatever had been hiding upstairs had followed me here. Summoning every ounce of courage, I leaned over the side of the bed. The room was pitch dark, and I could only make out vague shapes of furniture. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to peek into the shadows beneath. Just as my eyes adjusted, something shifted in the darkness. A faint movement close to the edge. I jerked back immediately, nearly falling off the mattress. The scratching stopped, replaced by silence so heavy I could hear my pulse in my ears. I wanted to scream for my parents again, but I knew how it would sound. They would think it was just nerves, just another nightmare. Instead, I pulled my knees up to my chest and sat there, wide-eyed, waiting for dawn. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping closer as the night dragged on. Every creak of the house made me flinch, convinced something was preparing to crawl out. Morning finally came, and with it, a crushing realization. The fear wasn't limited to one room or one bed. Whatever lived in this house was tied to me, following no matter where I tried to sleep. I never saw its full form, and maybe that was worse, because I still don't know if it's truly gone.